Lucy Wolfe, and I am a sleep consultant, and I am the author of The Baby Sleep Solution and All About the Baby Sleep Solution as well. And obviously I'm delighted to be here with the community from the Peanut app, and tonight I plan to do my best to answer a lot of the questions that you have within the talk that I will give. And then I think if we have a little bit of time towards the end, there might be one or two questions that we might be able to cover. But my hope would be that if you don't have the answer to the question this evening, you could be joining my social platforms, but also a lot of the information, the meat and the bones can be put on with the books as well to help you further in your journey. So I always start by asking, what is a sleep problem? Because although I know that lots of you will struggle with your children's sleep at different points in your parenting career, specifically in the first few months, although you will report or may report challenges with your children's sleep, we don't necessarily feel that that is a problem per se, or necessarily something that requires intervention. Very often what you experience, especially in the first few months, would be what I might represent, what I might describe as being typical infant sleep. So lots of families in general report that they may struggle to get their children to go to sleep. It might take 1 to 3 hours to get your child to go to sleep in the first place, or you might report that your baby wakes really frequently throughout the course of the night. You might say they wake every 40 minutes, or you might say that they wake every 20 minutes or hourly. You might report that your baby wakes or sleeps initially and then wakes frequently throughout the core part of the night from maybe 10 or 11 o'clock onwards. Some of you will suggest that your babies wake up and stay awake for large periods of time in the overnight period. And then, of course, some of you might say that your children wake really early to start the day, and others of you will be struggling with getting your children to take a nap, or helping that nap be lengthy in any description. Now, you may struggle with any and all of those items in the first few months, but unless your baby is older than 6 months, I typically think a lot of that is representative of young infant sleep. And although I am going to cover some things that I would typically encourage, a lot of the time it is just young children sleep. They wake a lot, they need to be with you a lot, they benefit from being held by you and available to them. And a lot of them can't do long naps, and a lot of them can't stay asleep for long periods of time. And if they can, that's wonderful. We will create that foundation. But a lot of them maybe cannot. And then it's beyond 6 months that developmentally your child's sleep is going to mature more. And as a result of that, there is probably more to work with. So I definitely treat your children's sleep under 6 months differently to how I might treat your children's sleep from 6 months to 6 years of age. And I guess what I always make it very clear is that anyone can have a sleep problem. And it isn't a representation of you, a failure on your part. There are so many force factors that affect your children's sleep. So if I just describe to you that anything your child thinks or feels, sees or does, eats or drinks affects their sleep. But everything you think and feel and see and do, and for breastfeeding parents, eat and drink also affects your children's sleep. And that's before we look at where they sleep, what they sleep on, the room that they sleep in, the environment. So it's a lot of force factors having an impact on how your child sleeps. But at the same token, I always suggest that in a gentle and emotionally considerate way, there is always scope and opportunity to help your child sleep a little bit better, sleep a little bit more. And again, it isn't necessarily about getting them to sleep through the night, although that would be wonderful if and when that can happen. For me, it's about helping your child reach their personal best, based on their age, based on their stage, based on the decisions that you're making, and that we're not looking for all of our children to do exactly the same thing at exactly the same time, because it's not possible, because they're so individual and completely unique. And every child is unique and every family unit is entirely unique. So I just make sure that we moderate our expectations around what our children can do based on their age and their stage, and what our children may be able to do also based on their own personal ability for sleep and the decisions that parents make around their children's sleep. Now, what I will suggest to you is that there are two major contributory factors to a lot of the sleep challenges that parents generally experience. And although obviously I know there's lots of questions, and there was lots of questions in advance of the meeting tonight, but what I want you to know is that in order to help you move forward, in order for you to create a plan to help your child sleep better, we do need more information about why. Why do children struggle with their sleep? Why do some of us, somewhere between 40 to 70% of us, struggle with our children's sleep at some point in our parenting career? A, because there's loads of force factors that affect our sleep, but B, because there are two major contributory factors. And I'll get you to think of it a little bit like this. First of all, your child's sleep is impacted by their sleep ability. So I always encourage parents to think of their children's sleep ability on a scale. And your child's sleep ability, it will range from low to high, okay? And the more able your child is to put themselves to sleep, specifically at bedtime, the more able they will be to put themselves back to sleep when they start to cycle through their natural sleep phases, when they emerge at around 16 weeks plus. So sleep ability is not a complete determinant, but it is very much a factor in how capable your child will be able to get through their some or all of their sleep phases overnight without parental input. Okay. And again, a lot of the time, we're not looking for your child to not have parental input, but what we are looking for potentially is for them to be able to do some of the hard work themselves, to be able to stitch some of their sleep cycles together with less or reduced input from you, in order for them to get the best sleep that they can get based on their age and on their stage. So if you are completely getting your child to sleep by holding them or rocking them or rolling them or feeding them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, except the way that sleep is designed. As sleep matures, it seems that if we are helping them get there at bedtime specifically, then we are going to be more vulnerable to nighttime activity. So when we are trying to help a young child sleep better, we typically try to look and see, can we improve the scale of ability from low to high, or as high as your child can give you when they're 6 months plus in age. Okay. And under 6 months, we'll talk about what we might be able to do to help them as well. But I guess beyond 6 months, there's lots more to work with developmentally. But I guess it's about understanding, first of all, that sleep ableness is a determinant in how well they can stay asleep for overnight, for early morning, and for daytime sleep as well. Now, that's only one part of the major contributory factors to sleep issues. The second major contributory factor is what I might describe as being overtiredness, or I might call it biological timekeeping. But what I really encourage you to do is think about your child having an overtired tank. And when the overtired tank is filling, and in some cases spilling, again, we will be more vulnerable to resistance to sleep. So that's taking ages to get your baby to go to sleep, or really frequent nighttime activity, or staying awake for long periods of time, or waking early to start the day, or being unable to sleep for long stretches or during the daytime. And basically, when children are struggling to sleep, they tend to be in a little bit of a vicious cycle. And what tends to happen is that we seem to be having irregular or too early or too late wake times. Unfortunately, then daytime sleep is attempted when your baby is already overtired. As a result of that, your daytime sleep may be short or varied in duration. As a result of that, so might the next nap. As a result of that, so may the next nap. And as a result of that, your child may be overtired come bedtime. And this further contributes to the issues. So when we are trying to improve your young child's sleep, as well as looking at all the other external force factors, I will specifically look at improving the needle to the sleep ability. And I will look at trying to stop the overtired tank from filling and spilling. And hopefully this evening, I'll be able to try and show you how we might do that for the different age profiles. So it's obviously lovely to be able to be with you tonight. What I would prefer is to be with you in person, because obviously I could see you and I could connect with you, and that's obviously easier. But as Rachel said earlier, it is so much better for us to continue to be able to support each other in this remote way when everything in that connective piece has been stripped away from us just in these really unusual times. So what can we do? That's the big question. So I encourage parents to what I call growing your sleep. And I suppose what I'm really conscious of is that I want you to remember that each child is completely different. Their rate of improvement and their skill and their ability will differ, but you can be instrumental in promoting it and nurturing it and growing it. So under 6 months, I encourage what I call gentle sleep shaping. And once your baby is over 6 months and up to 6 years of age, I would encourage what I might call gentle sleep learning. And so what we'll do now is we'll chat about what we might do in those early few months. And again, I know that for new parents this year, it's been especially difficult because it's not what any of us expected. And again, that support network has been removed. And there is so much more uncertainty as well. So the first thing I would say to any new parent really is never to really worry about sleep issues or sleep problems or bad habits or any of those things. I really don't believe in any of those things anyway. I obviously do feel that we can do things slightly differently and do things in a way that promote sometimes better sleep. But in the most part, in the early few months, I really encourage you to meet your baby where they are at. I really encourage you to take all of your time to get to know each other, to teach your baby to feel loved, safe, and secure, and to focus predominantly on building what I call the loving trust bond. Now, obviously, you are going to create a warm, attuned, and nurturing family culture that will transcend your child's lifespan, but it really does begin from the moment of conception, really. But it really begins for you in an active way from birth. And that really is what I would encourage you all to do, is to spend your time engaging, learning, getting to know each other. And within that, I also would then do what I call working behind the scenes in order to try to help your child's sleep tendency have a fertile ground within which we potentially could grow it. Now, lots of you will find that you provide a fertile ground, but you don't get what we might call a yield. And as a result, for me, I just feel that's where your baby is at. But it's worth always making adjustments and changes, and more than anything, getting to know each other. So I would say to you to remember the two main contributing factors were to do with ability, and they were also to do with being overtired. So the first thing I would get you to always do is try to avoid your baby from becoming overtired. And the one main way we can do that is by learning to read the language of sleep. So lots of times when I'm with a group and I ask a family or a parent group, what does your child do when they start to get tired? Parents often report, whinging, fussing, making noise, crying, pulling at the ear, pulling at the back of their neck, rubbing their eyes, yawning. And mostly, I would say all of those symptoms represent already overtired. And very often I do find that we're working in an overtired zone a lot of the time. And this does create unnecessary crying. It does create the resistance to sleep. It does create short bursts of sleep. So one of the most first easy positive things that you can do is read the language of sleep. So I would encourage you to acknowledge that we work on early cues, brief eye rubs, brief yawns, more your baby zones out, where they stop and they're still, where they kind of turn away into you. These symptoms, they're brief, they're not that noticeable, but they represent sleep readiness. And it's that we try to work within. And I'm not promising you that that's going to change everything, but it's a very, very good starting point. And again, within learning and attuning to your baby within that context, well, then you can start to have a familiar pattern to your day, and you can create a feeding and sleeping balance to the day within which you're going to offer sleep and offer milk feeds throughout the course of the day. So they almost are in sync with each other. And we can do that by having a regular wake time, by maybe starting the day no later than 7:30 a.m., maybe always starting the day with a feed, and then knowing that your baby is going to need to probably sleep every 1 to 2 hours throughout the course of the day. And they are likely to need to be fed every 1 to 3 hours, depending on your feeding practice. And for me, in the beginning, And I'm saying when I'm saying in the beginning, I'm talking about from 6-8 weeks on, when you feel semi-human again, that you could begin to maybe to put some sort of a flexible rhythm in place to your day, and that you're creating a little bit of regularity and you're meeting your baby's need for sleep by acknowledging their early sleep cues. That on its own can take the resistance out of sleep. And it also can sometimes help babies stay asleep for a little bit longer. But I do want you to know that under 6 months of age, lots of babies can only sleep during the day for 30 and 40-minute bursts at any one time. And that their nap rhythms don't actually necessarily establish until they're beyond 6 months of age. So often parents report that as being a problem, but it's actually quite typical developmentally for adult families. And all I get you to do is keep working away on the bits and pieces that you can. And then I use light and bright and natural light to help expose your baby and, signal to them a wake period. And then I use dim and darkness to help initiate a sleep period throughout the course of the day. And what I will say to you is that your young baby will generally want to be here. They want to be held by you. They want to sleep on you. They want to suck a lot. They want a lot of motion. And that is really, really typical. It is not a design flaw. It is a design. And I guess I get loads of emails and messages from families who suggest their babies will only sleep in their arms. And I know that this can be really frustrating. And I know it can be a big concern, but I want you to remember they've spent 9 months in utero. And so when they come earthside, this is a very natural setting for them to be in. So again, what I propose is that you meet that need as best as you can. Lean into that need. Don't resist it. Like, teach your baby to feel safe and secure. Teach your baby to feel seen and heard. And lean into that high intense need. Sling them, swing them, stroller them, wear them, just do loads of different things to support your baby. And within that high level of support, maybe see can, both parents help meet that need, so that it's just not left to one parent to continue to meet that need, because that's when obviously we can start to run into challenges. Now, obviously in other years, I would say, spread the risk, draft and support. If grannies and siblings are willing to help, then I would encourage that. But I also know that at the moment we're more restricted. But at the same token, if there's any level of support available to you, allow people to help. It is what I call an intensive care period. And I really want everyone to survive and thrive within that. And then when you're getting through your days, because your days will be a series of feeds and sleeps in any which way that works. Okay, I then also would try and see, could I look at that sleepability at bedtime specifically? So I'm always going to recommend that we create a sleep-friendly environment. I'm also going to endorse that, just like the health agenda, we room share for at least the first 6 months, and that we keep our babies close to us, and that we know that they do better when they're close to us, especially in the early months. And I'll always encourage you to start to create a bedtime routine, like a pre-sleep ritual, from around 6 weeks onwards, when your baby starts to respond to a social cue, like smiling back at you. We know then that you could maybe start to link in a little bedtime routine at bedtime itself. Now, bedtime in the first few months is actually going to be really quite late. It's going to represent very similarly your bedtime, like an adult orientated bedtime. So for all intents and purposes, I imagine that your baby will hang around with you, nap on and off you, watch The Crown with you, watch any other Netflix series that's available to us at the moment that we haven't all seen. And that when it's bedtime, your baby's going to go to bed with you. So that could be anywhere between 10 and 12, depending on your baby's cues. And what I recommend, if you are able, is to start putting my percentage of wakefulness approach in place. So my percentage of wakefulness approach is aiming to have a little bit aware and awake when you put them down at bedtime specifically. So I call it a percentage of wakeful approach because envisage in the beginning, baby is likely to be asleep on that last cuddle or on that last feed. And then I try to maybe do 95% asleep versus 5% awake and aware that you put them into their co-sleeper or their bassinet, so that they're aware they've been put down. And this can be the beginning of the scale of the sleepability. And as time goes by, you maybe put down baby 90% asleep, but 10% aware and awake. And you scale that back so that 85-15, 80-20, so that slowly at bedtime specifically, you are encouraging their skill ability from very early on. Now, if we could get to 70-30, that would be amazing. And that would stand you in really good stead. And that what that means is then by the time your baby is about 16 weeks, when they start to cycle through their natural sleep phases, they potentially will be able to do more of that themselves. And now they'll wake when they need a feed, or they'll wake when they need brief reassurance, but they won't wake on every sleep transition. And that is then how we start to maybe avoid some unnecessary wake-ups in the overnight period. However, I obviously am aware that lots of you will try that. And when you try that, your baby is not a willing participant. They're really upset and they don't want to be put down. They want to be put completely asleep. And that's not a tenable situation. And for me, when your baby is in the younger cohort, we're really not looking for any crying whatsoever. We are looking just to support your baby. So if they're not a willing and active participant in those adjustments, that I tend to keep trying, absolutely, but I don't put your baby under any pressure whatsoever. And then I continue to work behind the scenes on creating, the sleep foundations during the day. And then I also acknowledge that as your baby gets that little bit older, I also recommend that bedtime gets brought gradually forward, so that by the time your baby is around the 4-month mark, your bedtime will naturally, not biologically, range somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m. And as a result of that, then you can continue to grow what you've started in these early few months. But obviously, I'm well aware that as you begin this, you may report that you get to the 6-month mark and your sleep is still challenging, and you have some or all of the challenges that I explained at the very start. And it's at this point now, if you are still struggling, I feel there's more we can do to help promote and grow and nurture the sleep profile in your household. So I hope that makes sense so far. Are we all good? I hope that we are. Before I talk,
all good. Sorry, I am here. Just wanted to let you know I've just turned my camera off, but I'm keeping an eye on everything.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're all good. So that's perfect. Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that. So when we move into this slightly older age profile, there's definitely much more room for growth. There is still going to be variability, so there's no merit in comparing, but there is merit in being open to make further changes and not just laying in the kind of dynamic that it is just what it is. Children don't sleep. My children doesn't need not as much sleep as the other child. I always feel it's worth continuing to nurture and promote your child's sleep profile so it can be the best that it can be. And there's so much more room for improvement now. And even if your baby is 18 months, or if your child is 3 years of age, it is never too late to begin to make some of the changes that I'm talking about tonight. And again, before I talk about what I feel we could do to create a plan, I would just like to give you a slightly better understanding of some of the things, the influences that I find dilute parents' effort. So some of you will be familiar with my first book, which is The Baby Sleep Solutions. That's the green one, as it now is become known. This covers from birth to 6 years of age, and it is almost 4 years old. And so in the time that this book has been available to parents, lots of themes kept coming up. So when I'm working with parents in my private practice, they obviously do have the book, but they still are struggling and they need some extra support. And over and over and over again, there are 4 themes that seem to come up that dilute parents' efforts. So I want to tell you what they are. And then I'm going to talk you through a plan that we could put together to try to take everything that we're learning and knowing and then creating the beginning of the start of working through your sleep challenges. So the first diluting influence that I feel comes up loads is that your child's bedtime is still too late. Okay, so bear with me on this one. I told you earlier that your baby's bedtime will be quite late to begin with. And then I said that as time goes by, as your child gets older, their bedtime gets earlier and early, so that it sticks somewhere around 6 to 8 p.m. What I will tell you is that young children, when they struggle to sleep, when they resist sleep a lot, or they're crying a lot at bedtime, or they wake a lot overnight, or they stay awake for long periods of time, or they don't nap especially well during the day, sometimes even 7:30 is too late a bedtime for that particular child until their sleep ability is higher and until that overtired tank has been reduced. So what I always recommend when we start to make changes for your child's sleep and improvements, I'll always recommend a slightly earlier bedtime. So I always aim to maybe be asleep around 7 o'clock mark just as I get going. Now, I obviously appreciate that that won't suit all families. And for those of you who are currently with later bedtimes and everything works perfectly for you, amazing, stay, don't make any changes. What I'm really focusing on now is families that struggle. And when we struggle, I will always bring forward bedtime. And bringing forward bedtime has three main effects. Number one, it can create a openness to going to sleep with greater ease. It can also help your child's sleepability improve because they're not really tired going to sleep at bedtime. It lets them be open to learning. It can mean they can go into a deeper sleep, and it also can unlock their napping mechanism during the day. So bringing forward bedtime can have a huge positive effect, the effects of which you're not really completely aware of. So I'll always make that recommendation as we begin making our changes to our plan. Secondary to that, young children's sleep is often impacted hugely by not getting enough sleep during the day. Now, I try not to dwell too much on amounts of sleep. So you will never find me counting hours of sleep. I will keep it in the back of my mind, but I'm never going to lower your self-esteem by counting hours or aiming for the amounts of sleep that I don't necessarily feel are realistic. So I don't necessarily feel 2-hour naps are realistic. They're lovely if we can get them, but they're not necessarily what every child can do. Mostly, I'm hoping for our child to get at least one nap of 40 minutes and maybe at least one nap of an hour plus in duration. Anything over that would be considered a bonus. Okay, so again, I'm always keeping things quite realistic where ability is concerned. I have true faith in the human body, and I have faith that if we can help your child to sleep better by improving their sleepability, and if we can get to your child's body before it is overtired, I truly believe and see this all of the time in my practice that they can start to get enough sleep for their body. But what I want you to know that if they don't get enough sleep for their body, their overtired tank is high. And as a result of that, then your night waking you'll be more vulnerable to it. So we need to bear that in mind. But I also try and get you to think about naps in a slightly different way. And I focus hugely on nap balances. And I find that when we have nap imbalances, again, we are more vulnerable to a lot of the issues that you may report that we've talked about earlier. So the two major imbalances that I find undermine your sleep hugely are that your day is top heavy. So your morning nap is prioritized and long and strong, but the rest of your daytime sleep is less good. That means that even if your child gets enough sleep during the day, because it's not evenly distributed, they are still overtired at bedtime, and this contributes to some of the issues that you may report. Okay, so that's one imbalance that causes problems. And then the other one that I find causes the most problems is when the gap between daytime sleep and bedtime is too big. So between the ages of 4 months and 8 months, we don't really want your child to be awake for more than 2 to 3 hours as they get that little bit closer to 8 months. 2 hours is the ideal. So they might sleep until maybe 5 p.m. in order to be comfortably asleep by 7. Okay, so 2 hours is the honoring the science of sleep. Between the ages of 8 months and 18 months, we don't really want children to be awake for more than 3 to 4 hours between their last nap and bedtime. So that may mean napping until 3 or 3:30 in order to be comfortably asleep by kind of 7:30. From 18 months plus to around 3, when your child will likely start to not nap, the gap of wake time is between 4 to 5 hours. Now, you'll notice I've given you a range on each of those, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. When we're dealing with a child who's under-rested, whose tank is full, you're best to work off the smaller wake profile rather than the bigger one, because we need to lower that tank. So it's this wake period that I find causes lots of the problems that you report: resistance to sleep, overtired going to bed at bedtime, then waking really frequently at bedtime. So I call this my nap gap dynamic, and I'm always going to put a lot of emphasis on that in line with the earlier bedtime. So we try to tie it together. One of the biggest issues that I see for families is when we've moved on to one nap, the one nap is too early in the day. And even though your bedtime is 7 o'clock, they've been awake since 2 p.m. and that gap is already too big. So this is why, and for those of you who already follow me on social media, you know I'm always talking about a single nap starting at 1 o'clock. And the reason for that is I don't prioritize the wake period in the morning time, because it doesn't have the pernicious implications that the wake period in the evening time does have. And again, I'm working off evidence informed. So working from everything that I know, working with all of my families, and then trying to help you put it into place. So there's 2 diluting influences. I'm hoping this is making sense. The third diluting influence is your sleep ability. So we already talked briefly about if you're feeding all the way to sleep, rocking all the way to sleep, holding hands, patting bottoms all the way to sleep, then the sleep ability is going to be on the lower end of the scale. Now, it could be 5 out of 6, it could be 6 out of 7, it could be 7 out of 10, but it's not high enough to get you through the overnight or through the early morning segment of sleep. So we're always going to look at sleep ability, and we're always going to see, can we make the sleep ability higher? And sleep ability being higher is helping your child go to sleep themselves with your support, but that their ability gets stronger and more robust. So lots of times parents feel their child is independent at bedtime, or some of you might use the word self-soothe. Now, I don't really use that terminology, but I know it's a common term. So that would be similar to my sleepability terminology. But the point is, a lot of you will report your child is self-soothing, but they're actually being assisted by something like a feed too close to sleep time. So although feeds and sleep often are promoted to go together because they help sleep happen, they don't necessarily keep sleep asleep, because if your child sucks too close to sleep time, they often need to suck to go back to sleep throughout the course of the night, or wake really frequently searching for something that needs to be put in place for them to get back to sleep. So there is a partial sleepability that I want you to be aware of, and it's when the final feed has been separated from bedtime, but it's not been separated far enough away. So I guess I am always going to promote moving the last feed out of the context of sleep by at least 45 minutes. So some of you will have moved it to 20 or 30 minutes. But what I find is that muscle memory doesn't diminish enough to help support overnight and early morning sleep segments. So again, that's the third one. And then the fourth undermining influence is that you've made all these changes. You have a high sleepability at bedtime. Your nap gap dynamic is amazing. Your sleep is balanced correctly, but you have still nighttime wakings, because nighttime overnight needs to be treated as well. So it's not enough just to make adjustments at bedtime. The overnight itself is a segment all of its very own, and it will also need an overnight plan. So again, it's about looking at feeding back to sleep, changing sleeping locations, rocking back to sleep, patting back to sleep, and helping your child's sleepability also improve overnight by some of the changes that you may make. So once we understand that a little bit better, I feel we can then put a little plan in place. So when I'm making adjustments, I would always encourage you to decide where you want your baby to sleep. So they'll either sleep in a cot at this stage, like from 4 to 6 months plus. I would always want to see children in conventional cots. I'd nearly always want them out of positioners, or not even in them in the first place, but if they've been in them, I like them to be out of bassinets and co-sleeps. I want them to be in a big enough sleep space, unencumbered. And I want you to decide where you want them to sleep. So it'll either be in your bedroom, in their own cot, or in your bed, or it'll be in their own bedroom, in their own cot, or if they're old enough to be in a bed, it'll be in their own bedroom, or it'll be in a bed in your bedroom. So the key thing about sleep is you need to decide where you want them to sleep, and then you need to show them so that behaviorally they understand what you have defined as their sleep space. So if, for example, you have your baby sleeping in their cot at bedtime, but you keep bringing them into your bed, there's nothing wrong with that. But if it's not what you want for your baby, you need to have an overnight plan to show them and help them how to stitch and knit their sleep together, but by having made the other changes that we're talking about as well. I also want you to know that if you're going to start improving your sleep, it takes time. You know, it takes 4 weeks, 5 weeks to really start to see your sleep become established. You will likely see improvements within a 2-week period, 7 to 10 days even, but it takes much longer for all of the sleep segments, especially the early morning and the nap segment, to start to really become robust. So whenever you're going to start something, make sure you ring fence that period of time so that you have no big interruptions, no weekends away with sleepovers. Not that that's a big problem at the moment. No vaccinations, no change in diet, no massive change in diet, no change in medication if that's appropriate for you. And then if you've been using a dummy with your child, you may always have to do dummy runs. We feel that the more rested a child is, the less dummy runs you would need to do. So I then encourage your child to learn to use their dummy by always putting it to their hand and guiding their hand to their mouth. If it was a thing you had decided you wanted to get rid of your dummy and you were making sleep changes, I'll always get you to speak with your GP first before you make that adjustment. And then we can begin to replace everything that you're doing and changing with my stay and support approach. So if we put something together, I'm going to recommend that we start to have a regular start time in the day. So typically anything before 6 is nighttime, and anything after 6 a.m. we would consider to be morning time. And if your baby was still asleep, I tend not to let them sleep beyond 7:30 a.m. because I'm trying to regulate the body clock and I'm trying to make room for the daytime sleep, and I'm trying to be able to anchor the day with your first feed and your breakfast at this stage. And then depending on your child's age range, I'm going to get you to follow my feeding and sleeping balance per age. And all of my feeding and sleeping structures are based on the biological rhythm. And you'll find them in both of my books. That's all about the baby sleep solution. And this book is all questions. Every question you could have is in this book. So that if the questions aren't answered in this one, they're answered in this one. But they tend to work quite well together, that you can try to kind of merge and blend all the information to continue to move forward and improve where you're at. So I encourage you to use the age appropriate feeding and sleeping balance for your child's age range. And if your child was premature, then I always adjust to the premature age, provided the age is being adjusted in general. So that's normally when your baby is born under 35 weeks, that we would then adjust to your child's corrected age group. And then the other things I'm going to recommend is that you create this feeding and sleeping balance. I'm obviously going to try and recommend that we get good outdoor activity and fresh air and age appropriate exercise. I'm going to recommend that we avoid TV or electronics the hour before bedtime. And then when I am trying to improve sleep, I will generally separate the final feeds from sleep in an effort to ensure that their sleepability can be the highest it can be, and to avoid some of the issues that can often remain when the feed is too close to sleep time. So I feel that if I was going to do my bedtime number line, I would encourage maybe dinner at 5. And I do like dinner to be a main meal. So your meat, protein, or your fish conventional meal in the evening time. I then do your last feed maybe between 5:45 and 6:15. And I do that downstairs, lights on, day clothes, nothing to do with sleep. And then I begin your bath if you're doing one, and then your bedtime routine more specifically for around 6:30. So it's a bit prescriptive as you get going, because I want to try and avoid that overtiredness if I can help it. And then within that, I observe your baby's nap gap dynamic based on their age range, so that we're tying this in together. So if you're starting on Friday, for example, the day you're starting, you use your buggy, if that's what you normally do for napping, or you're feeding all day for napping. And then we make the bigger changes always at bedtime. On the evening you're going to begin, and you're going to do the bedtime number line with the nap gap dynamic, and you're going to introduce the bedtime routine, and your last feed will now be separate to sleep. And I introduce a bedtime routine in the bedroom that your child is going to sleep in. So for me, all bedtime routines are not equal. For me, I like a bedtime routine in the bedroom that your child is going to sleep in. I like it to be at least 20 minutes in duration. I like it to be dimly lit, and I like the bedtime routine to be full of connection, full of loving responses, and lots of engagement with you and your baby. So you might get them dressed for bed, you might then play and read with and engage with them, and then you have the bedtime routine like emotional scaffolding, getting ready for bedtime, getting ready for sleep time, if that makes sense to you. And then depending on what you're changing, you would put your baby into their cot or their bed, and then obviously if you don't normally stay, that you wouldn't stay. But if you are changing something big, like rocking to sleep or feeding to sleep or hand holding or laying down with, I use my stay and support approach. So my stay and support approach, again, is the bridge between, let's say, what you've been doing and the ability we're trying to create. And it allows for you to support your baby as you make those changes. So lots of you will feel that the only way you can get your baby to sleep is by letting them to cry it out. Whereas I'm supporting that if there is changes required, and if your child does need to process a change, that you support them through that with my approach, where you're physically available to them, you're verbally available, you use distraction, you pick them up to calm them, and you're very, very much an active participant with them as they're making that learning journey away from what you're doing. And you help them to process the change with the approach, and you stay with them until they go to sleep. So for some of you who never stay, if you take away a feed, you may find when you try and walk away, they're not happy with you walking away. And that is showing you the over-reliance on the feed to get to sleep in the first place. And how we bridge that gap would be with the stay and support approach. And it's a stage-based process. So you initially might spend the first 4 to 7 days beside the cot. And then as bedtime is becoming more established, I would start to slowly move you away. So over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, I would hope to be able to get to a situation where I can do a bedtime routine, pop your baby or your child into their cot or their bed, and be able to leave them when they're going to sleep. And that they would be happy for you to do that. And that their sleep ability now is scoring quite high at bedtime specifically, which allows you then to begin to work on the overnight period. Now, overnight, you'll be doing a variety of different things, but unless you make the changes at bedtime and you observe the backstory during the day, my experience is the problems tend to remain, or they tend to improve and then regress until everything is put together in that very precise-ish way. And then you can start to see what your child needs in the overnight period. So although I can't tell you, unless I'm working with you directly, if your child needs night feeding or not, what I can say to you is that if it's established that your child doesn't need nighttime feeding, I would begin a night weaning process. So I may regulate the feeding anyway. So I might do feeds every 4 hours for night, either breast or bottle. And then I would typically reduce the amount in the bottle or the amount of time on the breast. And if I keep nighttime feeding, again, I'm still going to regulate it, and I'm going to decide what's needed and how your child processes that. And do they understand when it's time to be fed and when it's return to sleep time? And do they understand that then by knitting their sleep together? And if they don't, I might look at changing the feeding approach overnight so that I can still keep a nighttime feed or 2 as needed, but I can also still improve the integrity of their sleep. So I hope that makes sense to you. Whatever you're reversing, whatever you're changing, if it's not bed sharing, taking them out of the room, taking them down to the buggy, changing sleeping locations, I always replace it with the stay and support approach. So that becomes your new default setting. And again, just like bedtime, you work with them each and every time they wake. So you're helping them return to sleep. And with everything, just like anything, the more they practice, the better they get. And then as time goes by, with your support and your help and your progress, their sleep can start to consolidate a little bit more as the first 2 to 3 weeks start to unfold. And then when you're continuing, you may then decide that you'd like to do naps with the same approach. So let's say you started on Friday night and you did Friday bedtime, and then you started with the overnight plan. You then would maybe start to look at naps with the same approach. And naps are hard to master. So 2 to 3 things are very important. There's no point trying to get your child to nap by day without feeding or bugging them if they don't have the skill at bedtime first. So the skill at bedtime is the transferable skill. It gets transferred into overnight and then it gets transferred into the day. So our first protocol is maybe to now look at having naps in the cot, if that's what you would like. And again, I look at timing so that I try to get to your baby's body before they're overtired. And I look at those early cues again. And again, I use my timing structure to try and maybe to help you with that. And then I always tie it in with the bedtime routine so that your nap also gets a bedtime routine, and that the room is dark for the nap, and there's a bedtime routine before the nap, and I one more time use a stay and support approach to help the nap start to emerge. Now, what a lot of you will report is that if you do a nap in the buggy, the nap in the buggy could be 2 hours, but if you do a nap in the cot, it's 20 minutes. And it takes time for the nap in the cot to grow. So what we focus on to begin with is the nap onset. So getting your child to go sleep and not worrying at all about how long they sleep for, getting them up, moving on with the day, and offering a series of naps, 2 in the cot, and the rest of the balance stay asleep in the car or the buggy. And then if necessary, an earlier bedtime as well to compensate for daytime sleep that's not amazing. And then really quickly, within the first 7 to 10 to 15 days, the daytime sleep will start to emerge. And if the daytime sleep doesn't lengthen of its own accord, we might work on it a little bit more, but only once we report that your child is good at going down for their nap in the first place. And then you know that you're only dealing with one stress period at a time, which might be the mid-nap when they wake after 30 or 40 minutes. We might use the stay and support approach again. So the stay and support approach becomes your new default setting, but it's only helpful if you do it with the synergistic approach of changing everything else. And again, 2 things I'm going to say to you is never be afraid of an early bedtime. to close the gap between the last nap and bedtime, to be more in age range. Don't ever be afraid of the wake time, because they're not that interrelated. More chance of them sleeping longer and more if you do earlier bedtime as a short-term strategy. The other thing I'm going to say to you is that it takes time for sleep to grow. And of course, there are so many other force factors that affect your sleep. I mentioned some of them already, but also we have the roadblocks like the teething, the sickness, the developmental leaps that also play a part in sometimes undermining your efforts. So it's important that when you hit those roadblocks, you have a predictable response. So if, for example, you've been working on your child's sleep and you have been reversing bed sharing, for example, and they become unwell, we try not to go back to bed sharing. We camp out in their room with them and we keep them in their cot and we support them loads, but you don't reopen the wound, if that makes any sense to you, because otherwise you create that mixed message. And then long after the sick period or the teething period has passed, you're back with the original problem. So it's about maybe trying to maintain what you've established and hold it and then continue to grow it as time and more time unfolds. So I obviously know tonight we can't cover everything, but I really hope that what you're hearing makes some sense and hopefully resonates, and also gives you a level of confidence to start to maybe make some of the changes that are needed to try and bring you further over the line. I think other items are really important to mention, and that would be, you know, your own well-being, your own self-care. And I know that sometimes can feel strange to be talking about looking after yourself when you feel you're struggling in the sleep or any other parenting area, but really your own well-being nearly has to come first, because then if you can't parent yourself, you can't parent another. So I really would encourage you to be, and Peanut app is brilliant because it's giving us that network and that community now more than ever. But I will always try and get you to prioritize your own self-care. And then I'm also going to encourage the family culture, the quality time with your child, that warm, loving, attuned environment that we continue to create and foster as your child gets older. You know, lots of connected time, lots of playtime with your child, down the floor with them, lots of eye contact with them, and lots of physical contact as well, so that they're having that felt sense of love from you, the parent. Obviously, we need to give them enough to eat and drink. And I know a lot of you will be in what I call that disproportionate feeding cycle, where they might eat more at night than they do by day. And again, it's trying to reverse the night cycle in order to give to the daytime cycle. And that often comes with maybe separating the feeds from sleep, doing that weaning process once it's age appropriate for your particular child, enough outside activity and fresh air, age appropriate exercise. So if your child is walking, that they walk with you, and if they can go on the trampoline, that they go on the trampoline, the balance bike, and if they're on the floor, that they're not penned in, that they're free to roam as much as possible, they're burning energy and they're stimulated, but they're also getting opportunities to be quiet as well. And then obviously the bedroom temperature, the bedroom itself needs to be dark, the cot needs to be straightforward, no extras. The room needs to be warm, regulated by temperature, dressed warmly enough. If you're using white noise or music, it either needs to go off before they go to sleep, or it needs to stay on for the whole sleep period. So again, all these things have an impact on your sleep, because your baby's brain is going to search for them if they're present when they're going to sleep in the first phase. And then more than anything, we need to be confident. We need to be informed, we need to be patient, and we ideally will have those predictable responses as we're making those changes. And that's why I really believe that having a plan for sleep is important as you get going, because you'll need to be able to be responsive to the adjustments and the changes that evolve when you're working on your child's sleep process. So I thank you so far for spending your time with me. I did say at the start of the session that I was going to answer a couple of questions that might be in the little chat box. So I'll just go to them now and just see if there's anything there that might be helpful. Somebody here has a little boy who's Charlie. He's 2 years and 2 months old. He wakes up between 4 and 5. Now it's 3:30. Tried everything in my books, but it's constant struggle to get him to sleep longer. Our bedtime routine is consistent and in line with recommendations. I never knew when I'm struggling with these early starts, and he is so tired in the morning. Is there anything that you can suggest? There's always something there that maybe needs to be looked at more, Sarah. Like I start to say, look at 2 years and 2 months. Like, is the nap definitely at 1 o'clock? I suspect it probably isn't, especially if he's waking at 3 and 4 and 5 a.m. So again, what you might need to look at is the timing of the single nap, or the introduction of a backup nap really early in the morning time, between 9 and 10 for like 20 or 30 minutes, so that your main nap can be 1 to 3. or 1 to 2:30, as late as possible, essentially, and that your bedtime is really early, like as early as I have promoted this evening. And then I would also get you to look at, there may not be a bottle of milk at bedtime, but maybe there's a cup of water, and that also undermines the sleepability at bedtime. So I definitely get you to look at those things, Sarah. But then I'd also get you to look at your approach. What do you do at 2 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning, at 4 o'clock in the morning? What does Charlie expect from you? And again, this is where you'd begin to continue to use the stay and support approach, that anything before 6 has to be nighttime, and that you work through that with him. So if you sometimes do the stay and support approach, but sometimes you pop him into the bed next to you, that's that mixed message, and that's not going to help the situation to improve further. But I hope some of what we've talked about tonight may also contribute. And I'd also look as well, because it's been such a difficult year, if there's enough outside activity, if there is too much screen time, just small things like that, just be keeping an eye on if you can, and be looking after yourself as well, because I see you have a newborn as well. Brittany, you asked about self-settling, and I hope this evening that we've covered that. And Brittany, you also about sleeping through the night. So we've talked about that at length today. So hopefully that puts some idea with you about what you can be doing. Somebody here is 23-month-old. His sleep has gone very bad recently. He has to stay with him. He wakes up very upset, won't go back into the cot. My husband co-sleeps in the bed, can wake up anytime between. So again, I really would want you to think about everything we've talked about tonight. And again, what I want you to remember is that overtiredness makes up a big part of a lot of what your guys are struggling with. And for that is looking at lowering that overtired tank, getting the timings of your nap slightly later, but also bringing forward your bedtime. I have a family I'm working with at the moment in my private practice. And again, just like most of you feel they've tried everything in the book, but when I assessed their notes, their daytime sleep was always finished around 2 or 2:30 p.m. for this age range. And so what I've done with them for a few days is a 6 o'clock bedtime to close up the gap, because in daycare, I can't get the nap later. But also 7 o'clock bedtime is too late for somebody who's routinely overtired. So sometimes using a default setting on early bedtime is another good way of trying to diffuse or drain some of the contents of that overtired tank that I talked about. Maria, you have a 7-month-old going to sleep without crying, recently crying once she's left in the cot. Should I go back and stay in the room again? I'll always stay for crying. I'll never leave alone for crying, because I feel that if there's crying, I want to find out first of all what's causing the crying. That will be my number one objective. But as I try and find out what's causing the crying, I will always support and I will always stay. I won't ever leave. And what I'd also recommend is that wherever you want your baby to sleep, I think it's a good idea to spend lots of non-sleep time in the bedroom with them, so that you play with them in the bedroom, you dress them in the bedroom, and you put them into their cot during the day and you engage with them in the cot. And Maria, what I would get you to look at it, 7 months is a tricky time because you're going from 3 naps to 2. So if you've dropped the third nap too early, your baby is going to be overtired at bedtime, and you need to adjust your bedtime earlier, and you need to move your naps later. So it's like a 2-prong attack. Or you may find that you still have the third nap, but she's not as tired at bedtime now, so she needs a slightly bigger gap. So instead of being 2 hours, maybe she needs 2 hours and 20 minutes of awake time before her bedtime with the third nap. And you'll do that for a couple of weeks until she's 8 months, and then you'll find that third nap goes and we go back to the slightly earlier bedtime again. So I hope that's helpful. I'll just answer 2 more questions and then I'll hand you back over to Rachel, who I think will close the session. And I think it's so lovely, that we've been able to spend this time together and that you've taken the time to join and listen. And also I'm hoping that some things that we've talked about today will make a difference and will hopefully help you feel assured that there's nothing wrong in some instances, and also confident to make some changes if needed. But you've asked me about the cocoon, a baby or the nest. I can't recommend them, if I'm totally honest with you, because we don't really feel positioners are ideal. I appreciate they help a lot of parents, and I'm never going to take that away from you. But for me, I'm looking at a normal sleep environment, your bassinet with nothing in it, your cot with nothing in it. And I teach your baby to get used to that. And again, I know that's hard. And if you've been using something like a sleepyhead or a cocoon baby, and now they're too big for it, it's time to make the change. And again, I always transition with the stay and support approach once they're 6 months plus. I just have one last question here from Emma. 2 years, 2 months in our new bed, changed over a week ago, taking 1 to 2 hours each night to get to sleep. We had no problems in the cot. I go back to the cot then, if I'm totally honest with you. I feel it's too young to be in a cot at 2.2 in the most part, okay? I think it's better for it to be in a cot until close to 3 or even 3.5. I'd like to know what the motivations were for not being in the cot anymore, but I really do feel that if it's not working in the bed and it was in the cot and there was no reason to put her into the bed in the first place, I'd probably go back to the cot for a while. And I think that I have a rule of 3s. I like them to be 3+ age-wise. I like them to be nappy free, so toilet trained, and I like them to be nap free before I ever look at the cot, the bed, if I can help it. So I hope that's helpful to you. So Rachel, how are we doing?
Yes, no, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. There's so many topics that you covered there, and I think it's just clarifying for people, don't panic too much. There's not all these expectations, just go with your baby. And that's what I really took from your books, is go with what they're telling you. And that really helped me to understand that I wasn't doing anything wrong in the beginning.
I know, and I love that. I love to hear that, because I think that, you know, we are kind of sold that model sometimes of they suggest or experts say, whereas actually a lot of us actually say, no, we have low expectations. And I specifically have low expectations. I have hope, of course I do. I have trust, and all of those things. You have all the wisdom, so does your baby. And everything can be worked on, it absolutely can. But sometimes it just is what it is for this moment in time, especially in those early few months. So reassurance is one of the big things I like to feel that we can provide for our early and new families. And then, of course, I love to think that for the slightly older families, we provide that extra hope that we can begin to make changes and adjustments that promote more sleep, whatever that might look like for your little family.